Alex, it's so great to see you here.
See you too.
Yes. So really the first question I had was, what is happening right now with Worldcoin? You've had so many announcements in the past few weeks. A big one came out the other day. Please walk me through it.
Well, we launched last July. We worked around 3.5 years until the launch. And so currently it's all about scaling up. So we just try to, as you know, we have a physical hardware device that we need to deploy in countries. And we just try to be as fast as we can with that because we think AI is coming really fast. And so fundamentally the thesis was right, but we just now need to be fast enough to execute on it. So we hire really fast, we deploy really fast, and just try to get there.
Yeah, since you started, what are the biggest changes that you've seen in both the crypto and AI worlds, and how have you had to respond to them?
Well, let's see, we started right before COVID. So Sam was already working on it for 6 months or so, but kind of the real kickoff was right before COVID in March. And back then, I think there was within tech, there was a huge disbelief for crypto, at least within Silicon Valley. I remember we talked to investors back then, and everyone was just, crypto is dead. This was right after the ICO bubble. And since then, of course, we had a couple other ups and downs. And then the other thing is that back then, AGI sounded like an actual joke. I remember the first slide for Worldcoin back then was that AGI will happen in the next decade, and crypto will scale to 1 billion people. It was two of the main bullet points, and people made fun about both. It was all the major funds, all the major investors, and the cool thing is I think both turned out to be true. I think AGI will probably happen in less than 10 years. And I think the scaling laws will continue, the models will get smarter. And crypto will reach probably the first 1 billion users sometime soon. There's a lot of cool things happening in the space. So that's...
Yeah, and can you give me a little bit of background on Tools for Humanity versus Worldcoin? You know, what are the separations between the two? And also, do you see yourself in more the crypto space or AI?
Sure. So Tools for Humanity is our labs company. As you probably are familiar with, all the big projects, they have a foundation and they have a labs entity. And Tools for Humanity is our labs. And so Sam, me, all the investors, we sit at Tools for Humanity. And then we spinned out a nonprofit foundation that has all the IP and the tokens. And in our case, we're actually very, very separated. But the foundation has a minimal scope of just building up the governance, governing the tokens, and just building out the ecosystem. Versus Tools for Humanity is an actual tech company. We have 200 people between San Francisco and Berlin. We have, we're in office. So it's somewhat counter to, I think, how most crypto operates in many ways, but that's what we chose to do.
And with Sam Altman, obviously he has a lot on his plate. What's his involvement with Tools for Humanity and Worldcoin today?
So, I mean, we talk at least once or a couple times a week, and it really depends on the project. So he's involved with very key projects like leadership hiring, fundraising, all these kinds of things. Does one-on-ones with leadership members somewhat frequently. But of course, OpenAI is the focus. Very busy time for him right now. But still, it was very. I learned a lot from him, I think, over the last couple of years, and in many ways, it went very different than we thought. And so now that the company is ramping up, I think there's many ways for him to be much more involved. So it's going to be a really exciting couple of years.
You mentioned fundraising. Crypto venture funding has picked up enormously in the past few months. Are you looking to go out and raising again?
No, the thing is, with a public token, you suddenly have many new ways to finance and fundraise. And we're also not in a rush. So we're not fundraising right now, at least. Might change later in the year, but definitely not currently.
You mentioned ups and downs earlier. There have been some regulatory hurdles for Worldcoin. We saw actions in Spain and Portugal and allegations that minors were allowed to sign up for World ID. How are you responding to those allegations, and what changes have you made to address that?
So there's two big sets of regulatory hurdles. One is around just biometric data, privacy regulators, and there's many things that are very different about the way how we approach things. There's zero-knowledge proofs involved. There's secure multi-party computation. There's a lot of new things that many privacy regulators haven't heard of. So it's a lot of just explaining things and explaining their approach. And then the other one is the actual crypto regulation, right? Because we have a token, we have a non-custodial wallet, and so currently we talk with pretty much every privacy regulator that we of the markets that we touch or enter, and that was expected. Like, we prepared for that for quite a while because that's their job. On the crypto side, I'm actually a little bit more worried, I think, mid to long term, because there's just like some countries that still have a very aggressive stance against crypto. And so I think that's just something that is not specific to Worldcoin, but actually something that we face quite a bit because we have a lot of users in these countries. But that's the two sets of involvements. And then of course, we always work with regulators and try to address concerns heads on.
And we see biometric information used in everyday things like airport security or unlocking your iPhone. Why do you think there is this controversy around the orb and these iris scans? Why Worldcoin in particular?
I think there's a couple things. I think for one, the idea that we need to verify humanness on the internet and that will be a core part of the internet, I think is people start seeing it, start understanding it, but I think it's going to become a much bigger topic, and even the US elections might be a major inflection point for that, right? Because you will have superhuman AI systems that can convince people of certain political beliefs that might influence democracies and things like that. So I think it's going to be a major move that will happen in the next 2 to 5 years. So that is one. I think that learning has to build up. Two is, I think, just iris itself is like somewhat feels very sensitive more than other things. And then the fact that we use zero-knowledge proofs and things like that, it's just hard to understand. It's counterintuitive. Like, one, why you need this, how does it work, why does it preserve my privacy? There's a lot of things that I think will just need to take time to build up. But then on the other hand, I remember one of our first Worldcoin meetings, Sam said, the biggest risk for Worldcoin is that people don't care, because that's the thing that actually happens to most companies. People just don't end up caring. And I think at least we solved that problem. So.
Yeah, and looking ahead, I mean, what kinds of partnerships are you thinking about for Worldcoin? I know you guys have already teamed up with Okta. What areas are you eyeing for the future?
All kinds of social networks, the big ones that you know, the big AI companies that you know. There's going to come, some exciting things will come there. And probably media. I think media companies will become more and more interested in the topic. And then, of course, within markets. So there's like two sets of partnerships. One is around World ID, so verifying humanness on the internet, and the other one is around the actual financial part of the system, so the wallet. And so there we partner with fintechs in all the major regions we're in. So LATAM in Europe. So these conversations are ongoing too.
Yeah, going off of that, what markets are you eyeing? Are you interested in expanding here in Dubai?
We are. I mean, I think Dubai itself is super exciting, both because I think, for example, VARA, the digital asset regulator here, is very progressive, very understanding of the space. We're very interested in Asia broadly, so I'm actually flying to basically all major countries in Asia over the next 2 weeks and try to meet the regulators and the major political interested parties. So South Korea, Japan, Malaysia, all of these I think are basically at the frontier of crypto and digital assets. So we try to be there and try to build up a presence. But in our case, we really, it's like you basically have like a hard tech company, and then you have an Airbnb or Uber-like operation in parallel, so it's very intensive. So we need to hire a lot of people and scale up the team really fast.
I noticed the US didn't make your list. How are you eyeing the changing regulatory situation in the United States?
I mean, I think Coinbase and others are fighting that fight, I think, for all of us. And so what we decided to do, given Sam is so high profile, is just to take a super cautious approach, and we really stayed out of the US completely with everything that touches the token, everything that touches crypto, until there's more clarity around the space. So we will just really observe and see what happens, and then react.
But you can still sign up for a World ID in the US, right?
You can, but it's a fairly small operation compared to other countries. So for example, in Argentina, I think we have now 5 or 6% of the whole country. We sign up 1% of Buenos Aires a week. So it's going to be double-digit percentage of the whole country towards the end of the year. So you basically, like, at the end of the year, you will have verification devices pretty much at every street corner. So the US is very, very far from that.
Yeah, as you're thinking about that sort of expansion, will you be making any changes to the orb itself?
Yeah, so it's actually really funny. We launched with what we consider to be a prototype. So it's like not even the production device that is going to launch in summer. And then we will make them much smaller. We will collaborate with many of the big tech companies that you know to build their own devices. So we really just try to set the standard and then hope that other tech companies adopt that standard. And so, yeah, a lot of changes. We actually built up a new hardware lab right now in San Francisco
Oh, very cool.
to build many more new things.
When can we expect to start seeing, I guess, new and improved orbs out there?
Well, the ambitious plan is July. Yeah, I think July, August, the first couple of them. And then later in the year, it's going to be at full scale.
Nice. And how are you thinking about data privacy and control over user data? I know you made a recent change where people can opt into deletion of their iris numeric code.
Yep. So we actually made 2 big changes that we wanted to do since a while. It was just really hard to actually engineer them. But one is that now actually all data is self-custodied by the user. And then second is that even the uniqueness check. So the uniqueness check is actually the really hard thing to do. That's like something that Face ID cannot do or other systems cannot do. That's just what actually a government is currently doing. And that is now also running in a secure multi-party computation. So there's not a single party that actually has all the information, which is something Vitalik also cared about quite a bit. And so all of those changes are now live. There's not a single party that has the data. And we use zero knowledge proofs to fully decouple the account from the actual iris code. So it's basically as private as it gets. I think at this point, like, we as a team, we could not link users and no one else. Like even in the worst case, if all systems get breached, it would be impossible to really compromise privacy of users, which is the goal. And that's cool, right? Because like self-custody and all of those things that the space worked for so long are now finally the place where you can actually deploy them to millions of users.
Yeah, and are you doing anything else to, I guess, beef up security around the World ID sign-up process or data protection?
A lot of operational things. So I think we discussed this, I think, 2 weeks ago, but in many ways the operation looks very different than we thought it would. Meaning, basically wherever we go and we put an orb, we have a line of people, basically every country, no matter how saturated. And so it really is much more of just an operational problem of like getting this operation set up in a country and doing all kinds of ID checks, security, finding a nice location. So it's very different than we expected. Back then we expected it would be very mobile and we would have many, many more devices and they would essentially travel around the city and the country. So we just learn as we go.
Yeah, I mean, what are the biggest challenges facing you right now? Is it, building to scale, issues over image? What are you thinking about at night when you're trying to fall asleep?
It really is all only about scale up. And that's, but basically wherever we go, we have a lot of users waiting for us. So it is really just entering markets fast enough and then expanding fast enough within the market, which is a lot of, we need to hire local teams, get warehouses, we need to build manufacturing lines. So it's a very hard tech effort, which is not usual for the space, I think. So that's number one. Number two is certainly just actually explaining over and over the project, why it exists to both regulators, governments, the media. I think that's O2 probably.
Any positive developments on the regulatory front as of late?
Yeah, totally. I think like one interesting, I mean, I literally went from theoretical physics into 2 years later talking to these regulators and political parties. So it's a very new learning. And I think the most interesting thing to me is how wide the spread is between how different governments behave. So you have like extremely progressive and technology forward governments, and you have extremely conservative. And so, but what I'm trying to say is that we interact with so many countries and so many governments that there's also a lot of very positive surprises where like people are actually excited, welcome us to the market, work with us on regulation, and understand everything immediately, and others where the opposite is the case. So it's a process, and we learn as we go. I think there's actually many. If I would go back in time, one of the major things I would have done is I would have hired, I think, someone from Airbnb, from the policy team, much earlier, because I think many of the things like how do certain European governments react, how do certain Asian governments react, that's something that only I think a handful of people have ever seen. And I think if you try to run such an operation, you need to get these people in really fast. And that's what we, I think, underestimated.
What parts of the world do you find to have, I guess, the friendlier regulators?
Asia. Asia for sure is both very tech forward, and what is just a very interesting fact is like we have all these PR firms, etc. And I think Japan and South Korea are the only two countries from everywhere we operate in which blockchain is actually a good thing. Just both in the public and in the case of regulators. And then you have markets like Singapore, where the government is just super high power, high velocity. And so I think Asia is a very positive surprise more broadly. Germany, actually. So I grew up in Germany. I think both the Bavarian Data Protection Authority, the BaFin, and all those regulators work really well with us and are collaborative. Africa is a very interesting experience.
And with the market picking up, how much are you paying attention to token price for Worldcoin?
I mean, not that much. I think it goes up, it goes down, it goes sideways. I think it's much more driven by what the world does, what the market does, than what we do at this point in time. So it's really just all operations, scaling up, building product that we think serves users and other companies.
And what's hiring looking like for you right now? Are you actively going out there and recruiting? And if so, for what types of roles?
We recruit extremely aggressive right now, actually. So we're now 200 people between San Francisco and Berlin mostly, and then we have 30-40% remote. And we recruit all kinds of technical talent, like hardware engineers, firmware engineers. We want to build a factory, so all kinds of things around that. A lot of operational roles, so people from Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, Lime that actually have seen operations in these markets playing out. So we try to get a lot of expertise, especially in local markets, in-house. Of course, GR, regulatory, product team. So it's really, the whole company is probably trying to double headcount or something over the next year or two.
That's great, yeah. And you mentioned this earlier, you guys are very in-person when it comes to your work culture, and that is different for the crypto space. Yeah. Why do you have that attitude? Why are you wanting people to be together in office?
I think so one, it's something that Sam believed, and so we just bet on that and took that very serious early on. Even in COVID, I told you the story, but we had this, we rented this office in a city called Erlangen, and all the apartments and houses around, which is in Germany. So it's a small town in Germany. And we flew everyone from San Francisco and Boston. We flew all of them in this random German town. And we essentially worked through COVID in that office, which was like super, and probably made Worldcoin like 5 or 6 times faster. That's actually what when we look at decision times, remote employees versus in-person employees, there's like a 1 to 5 speed difference roughly. So I think it's okay to work remote, but in our case, we just allow it for extreme specialists that are ICs. So managers, we will not hire remote anymore, for example.
And how are you thinking about decentralization with how you're structuring Tools for Humanity, the Worldcoin project?
Yep.
How does that play into your strategy?
60% of all engineering efforts are around decentralization, probably. And you have different parts, right? You have the chain, you have World ID, you have the hardware devices. And so it's uniquely complicated in our case because we need to find other manufacturers and then kind of find a way to actually onboard them onto the network, et cetera, then make everything fully permissionless in the coming years. So there's a lot of very new challenges that I think are very unique to us. But it's exciting, and it's really most of what we do. So most of the research is actually on decentralizing the whole stack. And because that's what will make it probably scale at 10x the speed.
And in your early days, universal basic income came up a lot when it was connected to Worldcoin. And this seemed like part of your mission earlier on. Is that still the case?
So we avoided talking about UBI because it's very politically loaded. But there was like 2 big motivations for the project early on. And one was AGI will happen, and it will drastically impact the whole economy. And we will need new infrastructure to handle that and deal with that. And we will need to try kind of radically new things. UBI might be one thing, but it might also just be universal access to compute. So it might be that every Worldcoin user will have a certain token limit for free, because that's how you actually create economic value. And that's what we still believe. It's like, basically, how can we make this technological evolution that will happen in the coming years, how do we make it accessible to a much, much larger sphere of people? I think that's a deep part of the mission. And that might be universal compute, might be UBI at points. So yeah.
And what's your goal at the end of the day for Worldcoin? I mean, is it to sign up as many people as possible? Is it to have strong partnerships with the governments that are currently trying to, I guess, inhibit your development? What does the future look like for you?
Create the largest financial and identity network on the planet. It's the very simple goal. And so it's all about scale, because part of the initial thesis was that crypto is now around so long, and maybe the one big thing that is missing are actually network effects. That's like what we've seen in other industries. It's like maybe you just need to get in a country to 20, 30, 40, 50% penetration for innovation to drastically accelerate. So it's like what we really talk about in leadership meetings is like, how can we accelerate the whole adoption of the space by 20, 30 years? And we think that is fundamentally around scale. And now we have a lot of capital, a lot of smart people to get there. And so we hope that we can help with that.
And with regulators, you've had issues in different places. What lessons have you learned, I guess, from butting heads in countries all over the world, and how has that changed your approach to working with regulators today?
I think the very simple takeaway is that usually when you have a startup, you enter a market and you have actually quite a room to grow until you get attention of the top of the government of countries. But in our case, because of SAM and OpenAI and the whole cloud around it, we don't have the luxury. So I think the big learning is that before we enter a market, actually approach the top ministers of the country, the prime minister, explain them what the project is about, educate much more than usually startups would. So in many ways, I think over and over again, we had to learn that just given the whole thing is set up, we cannot behave like startups usually would. So many of the classical startup advice, I think, doesn't apply to us.
When you're in a room with a regulator, what's usually the biggest concern on their mind? Is it the crypto element? Is it the fact that you're getting your eyes scanned? What are they concerned about most of the time?
There is really not most of the time, because it is wildly different for different markets, right? So there is, just trying to pick examples. There's African countries, there's European countries, there's even like India, in which crypto itself is by far the biggest concern. So everything, if you just are attached to crypto, you basically have fundamentally a problem. And for others, it's just explain the project and around the biometrics and how this works. So it's really, and then of course, the other big learning that I had personally at least is that the governments are much more divided themselves, right? So yeah, there's no universal answer. It's very, very different.
And in the world of AI, how do you envision Worldcoin's role? Is it, I guess, part of a sort of system with checks and balances on the power of AI? You know, where does proof of personhood play into this?
I mean, for one, the very simple to explain piece of it is that there will be probably many parts of the internet in which we will need to verify humanness, simply speaking, because like Twitter is a very simple example. Like currently we have a lot of stupid bots on Twitter, but eventually these will be superhuman systems that will be impossible to distinguish from anyone else. And the concern of them influencing elections and democracies is actually very real. And so there's going to be like at least we believe so, there's going to be a societal call out for something like this to happen. And currently the only option we have are government IDs, which is good for some parts of the world and probably not that good for other parts of the world, both because the infrastructure doesn't exist or because it actually might limit the freedom of citizens. And so we hope that we can help and be kind of an open source, decentralized standard that solves that problem. So that's very easy to understand. But then a lot of other things fall out of this, right? It's like you have the problem of RLHF. So how do you train these models? How do you make sure that they actually follow not the political beliefs of San Francisco, but of the whole world? So that's something we talk about a lot. Second one is just democratic input into how big decisions are being made. That's something Sam is very, very obsessed with, really. And then universal access to compute, and eventually UBI. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alex. It was great to catch up with you.